The late afternoon sun was hitting the windows of the daily grind just right, making all the dust motes look like tiny, tired stars floating in the air. For Clara Jenkins, the light didn't feel warm, it felt hot and unforgiving. Clara was 24 years old, but the exhaustion etched around her eyes made her look far older. She was a black woman, and her skin, usually smooth and rich like dark chocolate, was currently stressed and dry from too many days spent on her feet. She wore her thick, natural hair pulled back tight into a sensible bun that still didn't manage to contain all the rebellious curls. Her uniform, a stiff, ill-fitting white shirt and a black apron, only emphasized how slender she was, a result of relying too much on free coffee and too little on actual food. Her brown eyes, which should have sparkled with youthful ambition, were currently just dull, reflecting the frantic rush of the diner. This job as a waitress wasn't a career, it was survival. Every dollar she made went straight to rent for the tiny apartment she shared with her younger sister, Maya, who was saving for community college. Clara had been working double shifts for 3 weeks straight, covering for a co-worker who had suddenly quit. Her feet felt like 2 bags of hot, aching stones. The daily grind was usually a friendly spot, smelling pleasantly of burnt sugar and old coffee grounds. But today, the air felt thick and wrong. That feeling was entirely because of the table in the corner. Seated at the small, slightly sticky booth were 3 men who looked like they'd just stepped out of a movie about trouble. 2 of them were huge, sitting stiffly like bodyguards, watching the room with eyes that didn't miss a thing. The man in the middle, the one Clara was supposed to be serving, was the worst. This was Damon Thorne. He was a tall, lean white man, maybe in his early 30s, dressed in an expensive, dark suit that looked perfectly tailored, even as he slumped casually in the booth. His hair was dark and slicked back, catching the harsh diner light. His face was sharp, almost aristocratic, with high cheekbones and a strong jawline. But it was his eyes that truly unsettled everyone. They were a startling, icy blue, and they didn't look at people, they looked through them. They held a kind of cold boredom that made you feel insignificant. Damon didn't belong here. He should have been in a private club downtown, not a place where the water glasses were cloudy and the ketchup bottle was half empty. Clara had already messed up his order twice. She was dizzy with fatigue, and her brain felt like cotton wool. First, she'd brought him a Pepsi when he'd asked for a specific brand of sparkling water she knew they didn't carry. Then, she'd spilled a bit of the hot coffee he had ordered when she placed the mug down too quickly. Damon didn't shout. He didn't even raise his voice. That was the truly terrifying part. "Miss Jenkins," he said, his voice a low, smooth rumble that somehow sounded louder than a yell. "I asked for black coffee. This has milk. And it's half empty. Are you perhaps having a problem understanding simple instruction? Or is this just the standard of service you offer to paying customers?" His tone was like chipped ice. The way he emphasized paying customers made Clara's cheeks burn. She gripped the small order pad in her hand so tightly her knuckles went white. I apologize, sir. I'm just a little rushed today. I'll get you a fresh cup right now. Black." "No, don't bother," Damon said. He leaned back, crossing one leg over the other, showing off a perfectly polished, expensive leather shoe. "Tell me this, Miss Jenkins. Your establishment is clearly suffering from a lack of decent help. Why should I tolerate such incompetence when I have places to be?" Clara took a slow, deep breath, trying to remind herself that Maya needed the money. She needed to keep this job. She needed to apologize again, smile, and move on. But the tiredness won. The sheer, crushing weight of 3 weeks of endless work, the worry about the rent, and this man's utter disregard for her humanity snapped something inside her. He wasn't just complaining about the coffee, he was humiliating her, and doing it so calmly that it felt cruel. "Sir," Clara said, and her voice trembled, but she didn't look away. "I am sorry about the coffee. But I am a person, and I'm having a bad day. I'm doing my best." Damon gave a slight, dismissive laugh, a soft sound of pure contempt. He picked up the coffee mug, tilted it, and let the remaining lukewarm liquid, the coffee she had just apologized for, spill deliberately onto the floor, right beside the table. It made a dark, sickening splash on the already worn linoleum. "When I hire staff, Miss Jenkins," he said, watching the dark liquid spread, "I expect perfection. Your bad day is not my concern. Clean that up, and then perhaps you can bring me something cold that you can't manage to burn." That was it. The final, deliberate act of disrespect. He hadn't just spilled the coffee, he had asked her to kneel and clean up his mess while talking down to her like she was dirt. Clara didn't think. She didn't have time to process the consequences. All she felt was a blinding, hot surge of anger, the kind that only happens when you are completely depleted and pushed too far. Her hand moved on its own. It shot out and connected with the side of Damon Thorne's face with a sickening, audible smack. The sound was shockingly loud in the crowded but suddenly silent diner. The slap wasn't hard, not physically crushing, but it was delivered with the entire, stored-up fury of a broken spirit. It left a clear, angry red mark across Damon's pale cheekbone. Time seemed to stop. The clatter of silverware and the buzz of conversation died instantly. Every head in the daily grind turned. The counter worker, Mr. Petrov, a kind man with a thick Slavic accent who had been wiping down the counter, froze with his rag halfway across the formica. Damon Thorne didn't flinch. He didn't move an inch. He just sat there, his head turned slightly from the impact, the red mark glowing on his cheek. His icy blue eyes slowly, deliberately, turned to look up at Clara. For the first time since he walked into the diner, there was no boredom in them. There was something else, something terrifyingly alive and utterly lethal. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. The anger had evaporated, replaced by a cold wave of horror that washed over her from head to toe. What had she done? She could only stare, her mouth dry, realizing she hadn't just slapped a rude customer, she had slapped a force of nature. The two massive men seated with Damon, one black, dark-skinned with a shaved head, and one white, with a thick beard, rose from the booth simultaneously. They didn't make a sound. They simply stood, blocking the light, their shadows falling over Clara. The atmosphere in the diner wasn't tense, it was completely frozen. It felt like standing on a sheet of thin ice over a deep, dark lake. You slapped him, the bearded man, whose name was probably something tough like rock, said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that somehow traveled the length of the room. Clara couldn't speak. She just shook her head slightly, unable to look away from Damon's cold, unblinking gaze. Damon finally moved. He reached up, his fingers touching the reddened spot on his cheek very lightly, almost scientifically. He didn't look at his bodyguards. He kept his eyes locked on Clara, and a slow, humorless smile stretched across his face. It wasn't a smile of amusement, it was the kind of smile a predator makes just before the hunt. Well, Damon murmured. His voice was soft, dangerously gentle. That was unexpected. No one has ever raised a hand to me, Miss Jenkins. Certainly not in a place that serves burnt toast and watery coffee. He slowly reached into the inner pocket of his perfect dark suit jacket. Everyone watched, their breath held tight. It was a terrifying moment. Was he reaching for a weapon? No. He pulled out a crisp, folded white linen handkerchief. He dabbed the spot on his cheek and then smoothed the lapel of his jacket, straightening himself up as if preparing for a serious meeting. You have absolutely no idea who I am, do you? Damon asked. It wasn't really a question. Clara finally found her voice, a small, choked sound. I don't care who you are, sir. You had no right to disrespect me like that. I'm a human being. A human being who just assaulted Damon Thorne, the dark-skinned bodyguard corrected her, his voice devoid of emotion. The heir to the Thorne Syndicate. The name hit Clara like a physical blow. The Thorne Syndicate. Even in this small corner of the city, everyone knew the name. They were the silent rulers, the people who owned the contracts, the clubs, the high-end real estate, and the violence that stitched it all together. They were the reason politicians stayed quiet and police looked the other way. Damon Thorne wasn't just a rich kid having a bad day. He was the next boss of the city's most feared criminal enterprise. And Clara, a broke, tired waitress, had just slapped him. The horror escalated, becoming a dizzying, sickening panic. She wasn't worried about losing her job anymore. She was worried about losing her life. She was worried about Maya. Oh, God, Clara whispered, her eyes wide, tears finally starting to blur her vision. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. Damon stood up now. He was taller than she expected, imposing, and when he moved, the air of danger around him seemed to thicken. He walked slowly around the edge of the booth, stepping over the puddle of spilled coffee. He stopped right in front of her. He didn't scream. He didn't even look angry anymore. He just looked profoundly interested, like a scientist who had just discovered a fascinating, tiny insect. "I accept your apology, Miss Jenkins," Damon said, but his voice was chillingly flat. "However, actions have consequences. This isn't about disrespecting you. This is about disrespecting me. And that, in my world, is something that has to be balanced." He reached out and gently lifted her chin with the tip of one finger, forcing her to meet his gaze. His eyes were like chips of Arctic ice. "You have guts, Clara Jenkins," he continued, glancing down at her name tag. "Stupid, reckless guts, but guts nonetheless. I could have you removed from this establishment and your life made very difficult for the next 50 years. But that's boring. And you, surprisingly, are not boring." He withdrew his hand, straightening his immaculate tie. "Here's what is going to happen," Damon announced, his voice carrying clearly through the silent diner. "You are going to come with me." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs so violently she thought it might burst through her chest. "Where? What do you mean?" "I mean, you are going to leave this dreadful uniform and this dreadful place right now," Damon said, gesturing vaguely at the mess around them. "You are going to take your bad day, your exhaustion, and your temper, and you are going to work for me. You will be my personal attendant, whatever I need. Driver, assistant, scheduler, I haven't decided yet. But you will do it, and you will do it perfectly." He paused, letting the outrageous demand sink in. "If you refuse, I will ensure that your sister's college fund disappears, your landlord raises your rent tenfold, and you will never find a job that pays more than minimum wage in this city again. But if you come with me," he reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick wad of banded cash, far more money than Clara had ever seen in one place. "You start with this. And you will be paid 10 times what this diner pays you. Your sister goes to college, your rent is covered, and your life gets a little less dreadful." He dropped the cash onto the counter. It made a soft, heavy sound. The people in the diner, who had been listening with terrified fascination, gasped. Clara stared from the money, to the angry red mark on his cheek, and finally back to his eyes. This wasn't justice. This was control. This was a man taking something he felt he was owed. But it was also a lifeline. She looked around the dusty, tired diner, at Mr. Petrov looking scared behind the counter, at her worn-out sneakers, and she thought of Maya's bright, hopeful face. Taking a job with a mob boss was insane. It was terrifying. But staying here meant poverty, and now, it meant certain, slow ruin orchestrated by this man. "What if I mess up?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. "What happens then?" Damon gave that thin, chilling smile again. "If you mess up, Miss Jenkins, the consequences will be much worse than a spilled cup of coffee. But I have a feeling you won't. You just needed the right motivation." He nodded to his bodyguards. "Wait for her outside. She needs to change." He then looked back at Clara, holding her gaze. "You have 5 minutes. Don't be late." He turned and walked out of the diner, his 2 imposing men following him like perfectly trained shadows. The silence they left behind was deafening. Clara sank back against the counter, her legs suddenly weak. She looked at the giant pile of cash, then at the lingering red mark on his cheek reflected in the window. The slap had started a war, not of fists, but of wills. She had bought her sister safety and security, but the price was her own freedom, trapped now in the terrifying world of Damon Thorne. This was the new reality. She picked up the money, her hand shaking. The journey from broke waitress to personal assistant to a Mafia had just begun, all because of a moment of pure, desperate exhaustion. The silence Damon Thorne left behind didn't feel like relief, it felt like a terrible weight. It was the kind of silence you find in the eye of a storm, knowing that the real destruction hasn't even started yet. Clara stood by the counter, gripping the enormous bundle of cash. It was warm and thick in her hand, smelling faintly of expensive paper and something metallic, maybe the scent of danger. She looked down at her stained uniform, then at the bright, fresh stain of spilled coffee on the floor. It was a perfect picture of her old life, messy, exhausting, and poor. Mr. Petrov, the counter worker, shuffled nervously toward her. He was a small man with kind, worried eyes and a gray mustache that twitched when he was stressed. "Clara," he whispered, his accent thick with fear. You hit him. The Thorne heir. They will burn the diner down. They will." He couldn't finish the thought. Clara shook her head, her mind still numb. He didn't hurt anyone, Mr. Petrov. He offered me a job. Petrov stared at the money. His eyes widened to the size of saucers. A job? With him? Clara, they are wolves. You walked away with your life. You should run. Right now. Take the money and vanish. Clara wished she could. Vanishing sounded wonderful. But where would she vanish to? She had Maya. She had bills. And Damon Thorne hadn't just offered her a choice, he had offered a threat veiled as an opportunity. He knew where she lived. He knew about Maya's college fund. Running would only make the threat come true faster. I can't, Mr. Petrov, she said, her voice hollow. I have to protect Maya. This is the only way he gives me and her any peace. She looked down at the money one last time, stuffed it into her apron pocket, and started pulling off her stiff, stained uniform shirt. I need to change, she murmured. I have 5 minutes. She hurried to the tiny staff bathroom, a cramped space smelling perpetually of bleach and old soap. As she changed into the only presentable thing she owned, a simple, dark blue denim skirt and a faded yellow t-shirt, she caught her reflection in the cracked mirror. Her face was pale, except for the lingering blush of terror and adrenaline. She looked like a prisoner of war who had just been handed a reprieve by the enemy general. But what had truly shaken her wasn't the threat, or even the outrageous job offer. It was Damon Thorne's eyes right before he turned to leave. When she slapped him, his expression had been pure, cold shock, then a sudden, terrifying flash of lethal fury. But right after he gave his strange command, the order to work for him, that fury had vanished. He hadn't screamed for retribution. He hadn't called for his men to drag her out. He had simply looked at her with an expression she couldn't categorize. It wasn't hate, and it certainly wasn't kindness. It was intense, unsettling curiosity. It was the look of a scientist who had just seen a test subject defy all known laws of physics. It was as if she, the small, exhausted waitress, had done something truly unique that had broken through his wall of boredom. His eyes, that sharp, glacial blue, seemed to bore into her soul, analyzing, memoizing, and logging every detail of her defiant stand. It was a look that said, "You just did something no one else would dare. I don't know why, but I won't forget it. And now, I own you." She shivered, grabbing her small, worn backpack. She had to believe that by playing his game, she was protecting Maya. That was the only thing that gave her strength. When she stepped back into the dining room, she said goodbye to Mr. Petrov, who was still frozen behind the counter. "I'm sorry about the coffee," she told him. He just nodded sadly. "Go, Clara. Be careful." She walked out into the late afternoon sun. The air outside was cooler, but the tension was immediate and suffocating. Damon's 2 bodyguards were waiting by a massive, polished black car, a vehicle that looked like a tank wrapped in velvet. The car wasn't parked, it was dominating the entire curb. The 2 men were just as imposing up close. The darker-skinned man, Leon, stood on the driver's side, his eyes scanning the street. He wore an expression of total, professional neutrality, but his stance was coiled and ready. The bearded white man, Vaughn, was leaning against the back door, looking annoyed. Clara approached them cautiously. Vaughn, the bearded one, straightened up. He looked at her simple clothes and the worn backpack with visible distaste. "You look like you're ready for summer camp, Miss Jenkins," Vaughn said, his voice a low sneer. "Boss is waiting." "I took 5 minutes, like he said," Clara answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Where is he?" Leon opened the back passenger door. He went ahead. He had business. Vaughn looked genuinely baffled. He walked away. Just like that. The boss was slapped and he just told her to jump in the car. It doesn't make any sense. Vaughn looked at Leon for confirmation. "We were supposed to, you know." He made a vague, brutal gesture with his hand. Leon, the professional, didn't flinch. "Our job is to follow orders, Vaughn. The boss gives the orders." He turned to Clara. "Get in. No talking unless he asks you a direct question. Your phone is mine." Clara hesitated. "My phone? Why?" "Security," Leon explained patiently, but his eyes were hard. "You are now privy to the boss's location. We don't risk leaks. Hand it over, please." Swallowing hard, Clara reached into her pocket, retrieved her old, battered smartphone, and gave it to Leon. The instant he had it, he removed the battery and dropped both the phone and the battery into his own jacket pocket. She climbed into the back seat of the car. The leather was soft and smelled like wealth. It felt alien and wrong. Leon closed the door silently and climbed into the driver's seat. Vaughn got into the front passenger seat. As Leon pulled the car smoothly into traffic, the silence stretched, heavy and threatening. Clara looked out the tinted window. The ordinary streets of her city, the same street she had walked every day, now looked completely different. They looked like the start of a deep, dark forest. "I still can't believe it," Vaughn muttered, breaking the silence and turning slightly to look at Clara over his shoulder. He was still confused. "You slap the air, and he hires you. What kind of play is that? He doesn't hire people he doesn't vet for 6 months. He doesn't hire people who hit him." "Maybe he wants to punish me in a slow, horrible way," Clara suggested, her throat tight. Vaughn actually gave a short, rough laugh. "Believe me, Miss Jenkins, if he wanted slow and horrible, you wouldn't be sitting in this car. You'd be locked in a basement trying to remember your own name. No. This is something else. The boss doesn't do anything without a reason. And that reason usually ends in profit or pain." Leon, the driver, spoke without turning his head. "The boss sees something. That's all you need to know, Vaughn." She made him react. "That's rare. Now be quiet." Clara listened to them argue, realizing she was less of a person and more of a strange, captured object. She was Damon's new interest. And his interest was usually lethal. The ride was long. They drove far out of the normal, working-class neighborhoods where Clara lived. They drove past sprawling suburban houses, which then gave way to towering, modern glass buildings downtown. Finally, they pulled up to a massive structure. It wasn't a standard office building. It was a renovated historic bank or maybe an old museum, all dark stone, imposing columns, and gigantic bronze doors. It looked like a fortress. Leon drove the car straight into an underground garage, where the air was cool and smelled of concrete and expensive exhaust. They led her from the garage up to the private residence level. The apartment was vast and minimalist. Everything was expensive, sparse, and cold. Dark wood, gray stone, and huge windows overlooking the entire glittering city. Damon Thorne was waiting for her. He was standing in front of a window that showed the sunset, making him look like a dark, powerful silhouette against the red and gold sky. He had changed his suit. He now wore a black silk shirt and dark trousers, looking less formal but somehow even more dangerous. He turned as they entered. He ran a careful eye over her. "Ah, Miss Jenkins. Punctual. Good." Clara stood stiffly. "You wanted to see me, sir." "Damon," he corrected her, his voice smooth. "You slapped me, Clara. We are beyond sir, wouldn't you say?" She didn't miss the way he used her first name, staking an immediate claim of intimacy and control. "Damon," she repeated, the name tasting foreign and dangerous on her tongue. "Your first task is simple," Damon said, walking over to a long, sleek bar made of dark marble. "You are clearly running on fumes. You need to eat, sleep, and lose that look of terror. My assistant will be here shortly. She will give you clothing, a place to stay tonight, and details on your first Real duty tomorrow. For now, you are officially in my employ." He poured himself a glass of dark liquid, whiskey, probably. He didn't offer her anything. "I need to call my sister," Clara blurted out. "Maya. I need to tell her I'm safe, or she'll worry." Damon stopped stirring his drink and looked at her, his expression returning to that unnerving blankness. "Your sister?" "Yes. Maya. She's 19, works part-time at the library, and is saving for college. She trusts you completely. A great point of leverage, wouldn't you agree?" Clara felt sick. He knew everything. The depth of his knowledge, acquired in the hour or two since she slapped him, showed the terrifying reach of his power. "I will give you 3 minutes," Damon said, retrieving a sleek new phone from a drawer. "One time. Now. After this, you communicate only through me or my staff, and only when permitted." "Understood." "Understood," Clara breathed. He handed her the phone. Clara's fingers trembled as she dialed Maya's number. "Hello." Maya's voice, sweet and familiar, answered instantly. "Maya, it's Clara." "Clara." Where are you? You were supposed to be home 3 hours ago. Is everything okay? Mr. Petrov said you quit, and he looked really scared. Clara took a deep breath, forcing a cheerfulness she didn't feel. Everything's fine, baby girl. Better than fine, actually. I got a new job. A much, much better job. It's a personal assistant role. High paying. I'm starting tonight, so I can't come home. Tonight? But, you didn't even interview. Is it legit? Maya sounded suspicious and worried. It's totally legit, May. Listen, this is the part one want you to hear, Clara said, trying to infuse her words with genuine joy, thinking of the cash in her pocket. That money you need for tuition? It's covered. All of it. I've already got the first big check. You're going to college. Don't worry about anything, okay? You just study. A moment of stunned silence on the other end. Then, a sharp, choked sob. Clara, are you serious? Really? Oh my God, I love you. Hearing Maya's happiness, the genuine, unburdened relief in her sister's voice, was like a sharp, painful shot of adrenaline. It made the terror she felt slightly more bearable. This, she told herself, was why she was here. I'm serious. I love you too, May. I have to go. I'll call you as soon as I can. Be good. Lock the door, okay? Okay. I will. Thank you, Clara. Thank you. Clara hung up and slowly handed the phone back to Damon. 3 minutes and 9 seconds, Damon observed, placing the phone back in the drawer. Try to be more concise next time. He looked at her then, and for a fleeting instant, that strange look returned. It wasn't the fury from the diner, but something almost like a flicker of recognition. As if he had seen the genuine love for her sister and logged it as a weakness, or maybe even a surprising strength. He walked past her toward the enormous window. I should have had my men retaliate, he mused, looking out at the city lights. I should have made an example of you. It would have reinforced discipline. But then, I would have been bored again. He turned back, and his voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. You broke the rules, Clara. You made a scene. You acted purely on emotion, without calculation. In my world, that is a death sentence. But for me, tonight, it was refreshing. I want to see what that fire can do when it's pointed in a new direction. Don't disappoint me. He paused, letting his gaze, the eyes that did not forget, sink into her. Welcome to your new life, he said. The old one is gone. Now go get some rest. With that, he walked away, disappearing down a long, dark hallway, leaving Clara alone in the vast, cold room with the weight of her new, dangerous, and completely insane life settled heavily on her shoulders. Clara woke up in a guest room that felt like a museum exhibit. It wasn't just big, it was silent. Too silent. After the constant noise of the city and the small squeaks of her old apartment, the total quiet of Damon Thorne's penthouse was unnerving. The room was furnished in shades of cream and silver. The mattress was so soft she felt like she was floating, and the sheets smelled like fresh lavender. She hadn't slept this well in years. But the moment she opened her eyes, the cold dread rushed back. She wasn't free, she was a luxurious prisoner. After taking a quick, hot shower in a bathroom the size of her old kitchen, she dressed in the clothes a nervous young woman named Ms. Hayes, Damon's official, pre-slap assistant, had brought her the night before. Ms. Hayes was a thin, nervous woman in her late 20s, dressed in impeccably tailored suits. She was polite but kept her distance, treating Clara like she might be carrying a highly contagious disease. The new clothes were a simple, stylish outfit, crisp black trousers and a soft grey turtleneck. They fit perfectly, which only showed Clara the efficiency of the Thorne machine. They didn't just buy you, they dressed you. Clara was led out of her room and into the main living area. The view of the city was breathtaking, a sweeping vista of steel and glass, but Clara couldn't enjoy it. She felt too exposed. She was told to wait in a small sitting area off the main dining room. That's where she first heard the whispers. Two older men, dressed in suits that cost more than Clara's annual salary, were talking in low, intense voices as they walked past the entrance to her small waiting area. They were clearly senior members of the syndicate, maybe high-ranking capos or advisors. The first man, a heavyset fellow with a gold watch and a harsh Italian accent, spoke first. I am telling you, Marco, it's an insult. A waitress. From the daily grind, of all places. She strikes the air in the face, and he brings her here? He gives her a job. Marco, the second man, had a sharper, more measured voice. The air is calculating, Sal. He sees something. Maybe she's a decoy. Maybe she's a test. But a public slap? That can't be tolerated by the council. It makes us look weak. Sal hissed. The stories are already everywhere. The girl who slapped the boss. It's a bad joke. Julian must be furious. Julian. That name clearly belonged to someone important. Clara froze, listening hard. This was the first glimpse into the politics of the organization that now controlled her life. They weren't just criminals. They were a complex, worried family unit, terrified of showing weakness. The men moved on, their voices fading. Clara realized that Damon's decision wasn't just confusing to his bodyguards, it was shaking the foundation of the syndicate. By choosing not to retaliate immediately, he had created an even greater stir. He had traded a quick, brutal punishment for a drawn-out, internal political crisis. Just as the door closed behind the two men, another figure entered the room. This woman was the absolute opposite of Clara. She was wealth and controlled rage personified. This was Bianca Rossi. Bianca was a stunning woman in her early 40s, with thick, dark hair that fell in perfect, gleaming waves down her back. She was Italian-American, with olive skin and striking, high cheekbones. Her eyes were a dark, burning brown, and they were currently fixed on Clara with an intensity that made the waitress's blood run cold. She wore a dress made of heavy silk that looked like it was molded onto her body, and she was dripping in jewelry that flashed with quiet, unforgiving light. Bianca was Damon's cousin and his longtime fiancé. Their wedding, planned for the spring, was meant to officially merge two major pillars of the Thorn Syndicate. Bianca didn't walk, she glided. She stopped about 10 feet from Clara and didn't sit down. She simply looked her up and down, a look of pure, cutting disdain. "So, you are the waitress," Bianca said. Her voice was low and smooth, like expensive velvet, but there was a sharp, diamond-hard edge underneath it. Clara stood up, feeling instantly exposed and cheap in her borrowed clothes. "Yes. I'm Clara Jenkins." "I know who you are," Bianca dismissed her with a flick of her hand. "The girl with the reckless hands and the ridiculous reputation. Damon tells me you are his new personal attendant." The way she said the title made it sound like a vulgar joke. "That's correct," Clara answered, keeping her voice steady despite the fear clutching at her stomach. "Let me be clear, Clara," Bianca said, stepping closer, her perfume filling the air, expensive, heady, and intimidating. "I am not like Damon. He may find your little display of temper amusing. He may see you as a novelty, a pet to entertain him until he gets bored." She leaned in, her eyes narrowing. "But I see you as a stain. A cheap distraction. And a profound insult to this family. Damon is marrying me. He needs stability, power, and respect. He does not need a defiant street rat confusing the men." Clara felt a flicker of her old fire rise up. She wasn't going to cower, not after everything. "I didn't ask to be here, Bianca. Your fiancé is the one who made the choice." Bianca laughed, a sharp, mirthless sound. "Oh, the defiance continues. How predictable. Listen to me, you fool. Damon's motives are always about control. He hasn't kept you here because he likes your spirit. He's kept you here as a reminder to the council that he can do whatever he wants, even if it defies all tradition. You are his pawn, Clara. And pawns' lives are very short." She moved even closer, her eyes blazing with an intense, jealous fury that Clara knew was more dangerous than the men outside. "You will stay in your lane," Bianca whispered. "You will not speak to him unless spoken to. You will not try to be charming, or clever, or defiant. You will perform your duties and disappear. Because if you give Damon any reason to focus his attention on you for longer than a week, I will not wait for him to punish you. I will end you and I will make it look like an accident caused by your own foolishness." Bianca straightened, adjusting the cuff of her silk sleeve. The transformation was instant. The rage was gone, replaced by a cool, smooth indifference. "I don't play games, Clara. You're disposable. Remember that when you step out of line." With that chilling warning, Bianca turned and walked away, disappearing down the hallway like a shadow. Clara stood there, her heart pounding. The men outside worried about politics and respect. Bianca worried about possession. The danger wasn't just external, it was living right inside the house. A few minutes later, Ms. Hayes, the nervous assistant, returned. Her face was pale. She had clearly just encountered Bianca. "Miss Jenkins," Ms. Hayes whispered, carefully avoiding eye contact. "Mr. Thorne is ready for you in his private office." Clara walked down a long, dark corridor. The walls were lined with framed awards and photographs, pictures of Damon, younger, standing with older men who looked cold and powerful. Her fear was solidifying into grim determination. She had to survive. For Maya. Damon's private office was enormous and quiet. It was lined with books, not just for show, but thick, leather-bound volumes on law, history, and economics. Damon himself was seated behind a huge desk made of polished dark wood. He was on the phone, speaking low and rapidly in Italian, a language Clara didn't understand, but which sounded sharp and authoritative. He looked up, meeting her gaze over the rim of the desk. He didn't smile, but his eyes held that same intense curiosity from the day before. He finished his call, hung up the phone gently, and gestured to a leather chair across the desk. "Sit, Clara," he said. Clara sat down, forcing herself to maintain composure. "Bianca was just here," she stated, not waiting for him to start. Damon leaned back, folding his hands over his chest. He looked completely relaxed. "Ah, yes. My fiancée. Did she welcome you?" "She vowed revenge," Clara said simply. "She told me I was a mistake and a pawn, and that she would ensure I disappeared if I became too much of a distraction." Damon let out a soft, low chuckle. It wasn't friendly, but it wasn't threatening either. "Good. She's predictable. Bianca represents the old ways, Clara. Order, tradition, and predictable retaliation. You, on the other hand, represent chaos. And chaos, when controlled, can be a great asset." He looked directly at her. "Let's be clear. Your job here is not to fetch coffee. Ms. Hayes can do that. Your job is to be my shadow. I want you to learn my routines, my habits, and the structure of my life. You will be silent, observant, and you will learn about the people I deal with. You will be my eyes and ears in places where people forget to be careful." Clara felt a knot of confusion tighten in her stomach. "I don't understand. Why me? Why not one of your men? I'm a waitress, Damon. I have no skills for this." "Exactly," he said, tapping the desk once. "You are invisible. No one looks at the waitress. No one takes the emotional, defiant maid seriously. The world sees you as weak. And that is your superpower. My men are all muscle and known affiliations. Everyone watches them." He picked up a heavy, old-fashioned letter opener and twirled it between his fingers. "And besides," Damon continued, his voice hardening slightly, "you proved you have fire. Most people I deal with are soft. They are easily bought or easily scared. You were scared, but you still hit me. I need that unpredictable fire nearby. I need to know what happens when a rule breaker is put into a world of pure rules." "So, I'm a social experiment," Clara summarized flatly. Damon smiled, a proper smile this time, sharp and genuine, and utterly terrifying. "You could call it that. Or you could call it a very highly paid second chance. You get money, protection for your sister, and a glimpse into the gears of the city. I get a novelty who keeps me from being bored, and maybe, just maybe, an effective tool." He slid a small, thick booklet across the desk. "This is your schedule and your rules. Read it. Memorize it. Rule number 1, do not lie to me. Rule number 2, do not leave the penthouse without my explicit permission. Rule number 3, if Bianca or anyone else tries to remove you, you come directly to me. Understood?" "Understood," Clara repeated, picking up the heavy rulebook. "Good," Damon said, leaning forward. "Your first duty starts now. I have a meeting with the council members, including Julian, in the main conference room. You will sit quietly in the back, observing. You will watch their faces when they look at me, and when they look at you. You will remember everything, especially their eyes." He stood up, walking around the desk. He stopped right beside her chair. "This is not a job you can quit, Clara," he said, his voice low and serious. "The only way out is through the front door, with my permission. Or through the pavement, if you make a mistake. He gestured to the door. Let's go. Time to see what kind of impression the girl who slapped the boss makes on the people who run the city. As Clara walked out, her heart was a furious drumbeat in her chest. She was trapped between a man who was using her as a shield against boredom, a rival council member who wanted her gone for the insult, and a jealous fiancé who was actively plotting her destruction. She had slapped a boss and started a war. Now, she had to find a way to survive the opening battle. The whispers of the underworld were getting louder, and every single one of them was about her. This twist is perfect for giving Clara agency and raising the stakes beyond mere survival. Her presence in the Thorn Syndicate is now not just forced employment, but a calculated, desperate mission. The conference room was everything Clara expected, huge, dark, and filled with old power. The large mahogany table could seat 20 people easily, and the air felt heavy with the smell of cigars, money, and old secrets. Clara sat in a chair tucked against the far wall, a piece of living furniture. She focused on her breathing, trying to calm the frantic thumping of her heart. Damon was at the head of the table, flanked by the two council members she'd overheard, Sal and Marco, and a stern-looking older gentleman she immediately recognized as Julian, the highest authority under the old boss. Julian was a tall man, impeccably dressed, with silver hair and eyes that were unsettlingly calm. He looked like a retired professor, but every person in the room reacted to him with immediate, quiet respect. He didn't look at Clara once. During the meeting, which was mostly about property contracts and something called rezoning, Clara did exactly what Damon told her to. She watched. She watched the way Sal nervously adjusted his collar when Julian spoke. She watched the way Marco kept trying to make eye contact with Damon, a mix of loyalty and resentment in his gaze. And she watched Damon, who ran the meeting with a quiet, sharp efficiency. He was ruthless, focused, and always 2 steps ahead of everyone else. He was a master controller. But while the men in the room debated who controlled which dock or which block of apartments, Clara's mind drifted to the real reason she was there. It wasn't just to protect Maya. It was about Daniel. Daniel was her little brother, and he was the shadow of a hidden past that clung to Clara like a cold shroud. Daniel was 12 when he disappeared. He was a sweet, small boy with Clara's deep brown eyes and a smile that could melt ice. They didn't have much money, but their home had always been full of love. One rainy Saturday, Daniel was playing in the local park, just 2 blocks from their small apartment. Clara, then 17, was inside helping her mother clean. Daniel was gone for maybe 30 minutes too long. Clara went to check. He wasn't there. His favorite red ball was sitting by the swing set, abandoned. They called the police. They searched the neighborhood. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into years. No ransom note. No witnesses. Just silence. The police eventually filed it as a cold case, suggesting Daniel had simply run away, a suggestion that made Clara furious. Daniel wouldn't run. He loved them too much. The disappearance broke their mother. She struggled with depression until she passed away a few years later, leaving Clara, barely 20, to raise Maya and carry the heavy burden of Daniel's ghost. As the years passed, Clara became convinced that Daniel hadn't run away, and he hadn't just vanished. She believed he had been taken. And she knew, deep in her gut, that whoever took a child without leaving a trace had to be powerful, organized, and connected. They had to be part of the dark infrastructure of the city. Clara knew the police wouldn't help. She knew people like her, poor, black, living in the forgotten parts of the city, didn't get the same attention. So, she started looking herself. She worked her terrible jobs, always listening, always asking subtle questions, reading old articles, and following long-dead rumors. All the whispers led to one kind of person, the kind who dealt in the shadows, the kind who felt they could take whatever they wanted. And in this city, all shadows eventually pointed back to the Thorn Syndicate. Clara had no proof, just a desperate, burning suspicion. She had been searching for years for a crack in their wall, a way to get close enough to find answers. She had considered everything from breaking into their lower offices to finding a sympathetic member of the organization. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared her for the way she actually got in, a slap across Damon Thorne's face. The irony was crushing. She had spent years trying to carefully construct a plan to get close, and then her exhaustion and temper had blown the door wide open. Now, she was inside the fortress. She was in the heart of the beast, forced to serve the man who might hold the key to her brother's fate. During a break in the meeting, as the men stretched and poured coffee, Damon walked over to her. He didn't speak loudly, he kept his voice low so only she could hear. "You're not watching the council members, Clara," Damon observed, his voice calm. "You're watching me. You are distracted. Tell me why." Clara had to think fast. She couldn't tell him the truth. He would see her as a threat or, worse, a liability. "I'm overwhelmed," she admitted, which was half true. "I was serving greasy fries yesterday. Today, I'm watching you discuss millions of dollars in rezoning. I'm trying to process this world." Damon tilted his head, his icy eyes scrutinizing her. "A reasonable excuse, for someone else. But you, Clara, you are not easily overwhelmed. You looked at me, a man who could ruin your life instantly, and you hit me. You don't get easily flustered by money, only by what you lose." He tapped the table near her hand. "Whatever is distracting you, make it secondary. If your eyes are on something else, you miss the thing that will save your life. Or the thing that will save your sister." The mention of Maya snapped her focus back. Damon saw everything. He was a master manipulator, and she had to be better at hiding her true intentions. "You're right, Damon," Clara conceded, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "My attention is yours. I apologize." "Good," he said, turning away. "Now watch Julian. His quiet disapproval is more dangerous than Sal's screaming." As Damon walked back to the table, Clara focused on Julian. The old man was talking to Marco, but his eyes kept flicking toward Damon, a deep, silent judgment in their depths. Clara made a mental note. Julian views Damon as reckless and impulsive for keeping her. He is a primary threat. The meeting resumed, but now Clara was seeing everything with a new, sharper purpose. She wasn't just observing power, she was hunting for information. She was looking for a sign, a name, a contract, anything that might connect this organization to the disappearance of a child years ago. She watched the hands of the men, the coded gestures, the way they avoided specific topics. She realized that everything they did was hidden behind layers of corporate jargon and smooth authority. The real power was in what wasn't being said. Suddenly, Marco, the sharp-voiced council member, mentioned a name, the Northwood property. "We are still waiting on the paperwork from the original proprietor of the Northwood lot," Marco said to Damon. "That entire block is still tied up in some old family trust. The old boss tried to clean it up 10 years ago, but the documents went missing. Julian, you remember that headache?" Julian frowned slightly. The Northwood documents were lost by an incompetent staff member. They were vital for the full transfer. It was embarrassing. 10 years ago. The timing was almost exactly when Daniel went missing. Clara felt a jolt of ice water run through her veins. A staff member losing vital, incriminating documents? In this world, lost meant destroyed or stolen. And if documents were lost in that area at that time, maybe a child was lost too. Clara's mind raced. Northwood. She knew that area. It was an old, industrial block not far from the park where Daniel disappeared. She knew she couldn't ask a direct question. She had to find a way to get close to the files. The meeting ended after another hour of intense discussion. Damon stood up, dismissing the men with a sharp nod. As Julian, Marco, and Sal left the room, they all ignored Clara completely, cementing her status as a non-entity. She was nothing to them, just the defiant servant their heir found amusing. Damon returned to his desk, looking satisfied. "Observations, Clara." Clara took a deep breath. She had to weave the information about Northwood into her report naturally. "Julian is the biggest threat," she said, choosing her words carefully. "He doesn't like that you kept me. He views my presence as a sign of instability. Sal is a follower, he takes his lead from Julian and Marco. Marco is loyal, but confused by your choices." Damon nodded slowly, a slight smile touching his lips. "All accurate. Anything else?" "They are all afraid of you," Clara continued, watching his reaction. "They respect your power, but they are waiting for you to make a mistake." "And the topics?" Damon pressed. "What did you take away from the discussion of the properties?" "It was all about controlling cash flow through property acquisitions," Clara replied smoothly. "But I noticed a tension around the Northwood property. You mentioned an old family trust and documents that went missing 10 years ago. It seemed to frustrate Julian. Damon paused, raising an eyebrow. You paid attention to a decade-old administrative error? Most people wouldn't even register that detail. Details matter, Clara said simply, holding his gaze. A property tied up for 10 years means lost profits. That seems important, even if it's old. Damon looked at her for a long, quiet moment, that unsettling curiosity returning to his eyes. He wasn't bothered by her observation, he seemed impressed. Very well, Clara, he said, tapping a stylus on his desk. The Northwood files are old, but they are stored in the archives here. They are a mess. Your next duty is to go down to the archives with Ms. Hayes tomorrow. You will organize those specific documents. I want a clean, simple report on the history of that property by the end of the week. Clara's heart leaped. It was an invitation. An open door. The universe had just given her a direct path to the single piece of information she had been hunting for years. The documents that went missing when her brother did. I can do that, Damon, Clara said, keeping her voice completely level, betraying none of the seismic shift of emotion she felt inside. Damon nodded. Good. Ms. Hayes will give you access. Now, get some rest. And Clara. Yes, Damon. Remember why you are here. Your primary directive is to serve me. Don't let your old life, or old problems, get in the way of your new duties. It would be a fatal distraction. As Clara left the office, she knew she was playing the most dangerous game of her life. She was forced to obey him, but she had a secret, desperate mission that he couldn't know about. She was one step closer to Daniel, and that was all that mattered. She had to find those Northwood documents, no matter the cost. That's a brilliant way to externalize the threat. This misinterpretation adds a high-stakes layer of unintended danger, making Clara a target for reasons completely unrelated to her actual mission. It also increases the pressure on Damon, as her safety is now tied to his reputation. Clara woke up on her second day in the Thorne penthouse feeling a strange mix of terror and focus. The terror was for her life, and the focus was on Daniel. She knew the most dangerous place she could be was close to Damon, but it was also the only place she had a chance of finding the Northwood files. She put on another set of the clothes Ms. Hayes had provided, a neat charcoal skirt and a cream blouse, and headed down to the enormous kitchen for breakfast. The kitchen was staffed by silent, efficient workers who moved like ghosts. They served her coffee and a small, perfect plate of eggs and fruit. As she ate, she overheard two of the household staff whispering in the corner. They spoke in quick, hushed Spanish. Clara's Spanish wasn't perfect, but she caught enough. The Velasco family is agitated, one whispered, wiping down a marble counter. They think the boss is sending a signal. They think she is the messenger. The slap? The other asked, eyes wide. They think a common slap is a signal of war. They think it's a distraction, the first one confirmed. The Velasco boss thinks Damon Thorne is planning a move on their ports, and he sent this girl in the diner to make a public mockery of himself to throw them off the scent. They believe she delivered a private message before she hit him. They are hunting for her. Clara nearly choked on her coffee. This was worse than she imagined. The internal threats, Julian and Bianca, were bad enough, but now an entire rival family, the Velascos, was hunting her because they believed she was part of Damon's elaborate, confusing strategy. They didn't see her as a waitress. They saw her as a highly trained, silent envoy, capable of delivering coded insults. This misinterpretation was all thanks to Damon's own arrogance. His power was so absolute that no one could believe a simple, broke woman would dare slap him without a much larger, hidden meaning behind it. The slap wasn't an outburst, it was a coded act of defiance that Damon then amplified by hiring her. Clara finished her breakfast quickly, her appetite gone. She found Ms. Hayes waiting nervously by the elevator. "Good morning, Miss Jenkins," Ms. Hayes said, handing Clara a small security key card. "Your primary task today is the archives. You need to organize the historical files on the Northwood property. It's critical. Mr. Thorne is highly specific about this." Ms. Hayes led her down several flights in the service elevator, past levels filled with offices and storage, until they reached the deepest, quietest floor, the archives. The archives were a huge space, cold and dry, smelling strongly of old paper and dust. Row after row of tall metal shelves held thick, worn files, all neatly labeled but clearly ancient. This was the recorded history of the Thorn Syndicate's legal, and probably illegal, operations in the city. This is the section. Ms. Hayes indicated a set of files clearly labeled Property Acquisitions, 1990 to 2015. The Northwood documents are somewhere in here. They are cross-referenced incorrectly, so it will take time. I have a meeting, but I will be back to check on you. Do not touch anything else. Do not speak to anyone. If you need assistance, use the internal phone and call my extension. Ms. Hayes handed Clara a pair of thin latex gloves. Handle these documents with care, Miss Jenkins. They are delicate. And then, Clara was alone. The sheer volume of files was overwhelming, but the cold, dusty environment felt strangely comforting. She was a professional again, organizing and searching, just like she had been doing in her own life for years. The difference was, this time, the answer might actually be in the files in front of her. She started pulling the files, setting them on a metal table, and carefully leafing through them. Deeds, surveys, old memos, all the boring, dense paperwork that showed how the Thorn family had quietly, systematically bought up large chunks of the city. Hours passed. The quiet was absolute, broken only by the soft rustle of paper. Clara was focusing intently on the files from 10 years ago, searching for the name Northwood, or any mention of missing documentation or staff shakeups. She found nothing connecting the property directly to a missing child, but she did find a pattern. 10 years ago, the syndicate went through a massive, quiet restructuring. Key properties changed hands rapidly, and there were several memos hinting at a cleanup operation involving property deeds and legal transfers. The old boss cleaned up his messes, Clara thought grimly. And Daniel might have been one of those messes, tied up somehow in the old owner of the Northwood lot. Suddenly, the heavy metal door to the archives hissed open. Clara froze, quickly sliding the files she was examining back into their shelf. She stood still, trying to look like a woman simply organizing files. 3 men walked in. They were not Damon's bodyguards. They were dressed in cheap, slightly ill-fitting suits, and they had the hard, anxious look of people who were paid to be violent, not professional. They were looking for something, or someone. They were Velasco's. They fanned out, their eyes scanning the rows of shelves. They spoke in guttural, fast English, their voices echoing in the huge, empty room. "She's not here," the biggest one grumbled, running a hand over his shaved head. "The informant said the whore was down here messing with the books." "The little maid is definitely in the building," the second man, thinner and wearing a gold chain, insisted. "The boss wants her found and questioned. She knows what Damon is planning." Clara held her breath, shrinking back slightly, using the height of the metal shelves to hide her small figure. They were looking for the little maid who was messing with the books. She knew they couldn't possibly know what she looked like. She was the invisible waitress. But if they saw anyone out of place, she was dead. The big man suddenly spotted her. She was wearing a different blouse and skirt than she had in the diner, but the color of her skin and the slight apprehension in her posture were enough. He pointed a thick finger at her. "Hey. You. The new one." Clara knew she had to play the part of the dumb, subservient worker. She stepped out, looking confused and slightly frightened, which wasn't hard to fake. "Yes? Can I help you, sirs? I'm just organizing the old files for Ms. Hayes." The 3 men stopped and exchanged a look. They hadn't expected her to be so ordinary. The thin man with the gold chain stepped forward. "You work for Damon Thorn, don't you? The new little messenger." "Messenger?" Clara asked, putting on her most confused face. "No, sir. I'm just his new personal assistant. I was hired to organize his schedule and files. I was a waitress before this. I'm new." The big man sneered. A waitress who slapped him in the face in public. "That was a direct insult to us, little girl. A warning. Now, tell us what Damon is planning for the ports." "I don't know what you're talking about," Clara insisted, backing away slowly. "I don't know anything about ports or plans. I just got yelled at for mixing up his coffee order yesterday. That's why I'm here. I messed up." The thin man didn't believe her. He saw the new, expensive clothes, the key card clipped to her skirt, and the obvious proximity to the boss. "Stop lying. Damon doesn't hire incompetence. You are a spy. Tell us the message, or we make you wish you never walked into that greasy diner." He lunged at her. Clara didn't think, she reacted. Years of working in a busy, cramped diner had given her quick feet and good spatial awareness. She sidestepped the man's grab, spinning around the corner of the metal shelf. The thin man stumbled, hitting the metal shelves with a crash. A cascade of old files rained down on him. "She's running. Get her," the big man yelled. Clara bolted down the main aisle of the archives. She wasn't running toward the door, which was too far and probably locked to them. She was running toward the back corner where she knew the rarely used utility closet was located. The three men were heavier, but she was faster and knew the terrain better. As they chased her, Clara grabbed a handful of loose, dusty files off the shelves and flung them into the air behind her, creating a blinding paper blizzard. She reached the utility closet, fumbling quickly with the handle. It was unlocked. She slipped inside, pulling the door shut just as the three men skidded to a stop right in front of it. The closet was tiny and dark, smelling of bleach and mothballs. She pressed her back against the cool wall, trying to control her ragged breathing. "She's in here," the big man snarled, grabbing the door handle. Clara knew she couldn't outfight them. All she had was her wits. She looked around the tiny closet, her hands scrambling, and found a heavy, old-fashioned brass floor polisher stored in the corner. As the big man yanked the door open, Clara swung the floor polisher up high and brought the heavy brass base down hard against his exposed forearm. A sickening crunch echoed in the confined space, followed by a raw, bellowing scream of pain. The big man stumbled backward, clutching his arm, tears streaming from his eyes. The other two were stunned for only a second. That second was all Clara needed. She used the opening to burst out of the closet, not running away, but running toward the nearest internal phone on the wall near the shelving. She grabbed the receiver and punched the internal emergency number Ms. Hayes had pointed out earlier. "Security. Archives. 3 intruders. Velasco. They are armed." Clara yelled into the phone, her voice shaking but clear. She threw the receiver down. The name Velasco and armed being said in the highly secure penthouse was like throwing gasoline on a fire. The two remaining Velasco men looked terrified, not of Clara, but of the chaos she had created. They had been sent for a silent, quick abduction, not an armed confrontation in the heart of the Thorn Fortress. "We have to go," the thin man yelled at his injured friend. "They know it's us." Clara, weaponless now, stood her ground between them and the exit. She was breathing heavily, her heart ready to explode, but she looked defiant, just like she had in the diner. Before the men could decide whether to attack her or run, a siren blared through the archives, followed by the terrifying sound of heavy boots pounding down the stairs. The Velasco men panicked. They dragged their injured friend, abandoning their mission, and scrambled back toward the main archive door just as a squad of Damon's heavily armed, silent security guards burst in. The security detail didn't ask questions. They moved with frightening speed, tackling the Velasco men to the ground, pinning them down with efficient brutality. The head of security, a calm-looking man with cold eyes, walked over to Clara. He looked her up and down, taking in her disheveled hair and the terror in her eyes. "Miss Jenkins," he said, his voice clipped. "Are you injured?" "And no," Clara managed, holding the counter for support. They thought I was a messenger. From Damon. They wanted to know about the ports." The security chief frowned, looking at the restrained men who were now spitting curses. He pulled out a radio. "Get the boss on the line. Tell him we have 3 Velasco men in the archives. They were targeting his new assistant, believing she's a coded signal." Clara watched as the Velasco men were dragged out, still struggling. The archives were left in a mess of old paper and the smell of fear. She sank onto the metal bench, her body shaking uncontrollably. She hadn't just gotten closer to the truth, she had become a public enemy number 1 for the rival syndicate, all because Damon Thorne's ego was too large to allow for a simple act of spontaneous defiance. She was the coded message. She was the signal of war. And now, she was in more danger than ever before. She had survived the archives, but the streets were hunting her. After the chaos in the archives, Clara was a wreck. Damon's security team interrogated her for what felt like hours, not because they suspected her, but because they couldn't wrap their heads around the Velasco's mistake. She was a waitress, not a spy. But in the twisted logic of the underworld, her very ordinariness made her an anomaly, and anomalies were dangerous. Finally, Miss Hayes, looking even more flustered than usual, led Clara back to her guest room. "Mr. Thorne says you are to stay in your room until further notice," she instructed, her voice tight with worry. His displeased with the Velasco's interpretation. Clara locked her door, even though she knew it wouldn't stop anyone if they truly wanted in. She sank onto the luxurious bed, her body trembling from adrenaline. She had faced danger before in the diner, angry customers, petty thieves, but this was different. These men weren't after her tips, they were after information, and they were ready to hurt her to get it. She thought about Daniel and Maya. This whole situation was supposed to protect them, not put her in the crosshairs of a mafia war. She needed to be more careful. Later that evening, after a solitary, uneasy dinner brought to her room, Clara was restless. She paced the room, the luxurious carpet doing little to soothe her frayed nerves. She looked out the window at the glittering city below. The lights seemed to mock her, reminding her of the freedom she no longer had. Around midnight, a soft ping came from her phone, the one Damon had given her for emergencies. She grabbed it, her heart leaping. It was a text message, short and to the point. "Balcony. Now. Alone. Don't speak." The message was from an unknown number. Clara's first thought was that it was a trap. Bianca, perhaps, or another one of Julian's men trying to corner her. But the urgency and the directness of the command, the feeling it gave her, felt like Damon. Hesitantly, she walked to the sliding glass door that led to her small private balcony. She peered out into the cool night air. The city spread out like a shimmering blanket. There was no one there. Taking a deep breath, Clara slid the door open and stepped out. The breeze was cool against her face. She looked down at the street, then up at the dark sky. Nothing. Just as she was about to turn back inside, a voice, low and smooth, spoke from the shadows directly to her left. "Impressive. You actually follow instructions." Clara gasped, spinning around. There, leaning against the railing of his private, main balcony, which was just a few feet from hers, was Damon Thorne. He was dressed in a dark, simple tracksuit, looking like a phantom in the low light. He had clearly stepped out from his side of the penthouse, using the connecting architecture between their private spaces. "Damon." Clara whispered, startled. "What are you doing here? I thought you were displeased." He didn't move from the shadows. His face was unreadable. "I am always displeased when my carefully constructed world is disturbed. Especially by an outsider." He stepped a little closer, and the moonlight caught his face. His eyes, those icy blue eyes, were sharp and intense. "The Velascos were looking for you today," Damon stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "They believed the slap was a coded signal, that you were my personal envoy delivering a message of war. An idiotic assumption, but one they acted upon with characteristic clumsiness." Clara felt a fresh wave of fear. "I know. I told security everything. I just tried to organize the files, like you asked." "You also defended yourself," Damon noted, a faint flicker of something that might have been admiration in his eyes. "And you called for security directly, using the emergency code. You're learning quickly, Clara." He paused. "But my security detail can only protect you inside these walls. The Velascos don't give up. They are humiliated now. They will try again. And they will try outside." Clara swallowed hard. "So, what does that mean for me?" "It means you are too much of a liability to keep here, making noise and attracting unwanted attention," Damon said, his voice flat. "Julian and Bianca are already making a fuss. The council is questioning my judgment. I should dispose of you." Clara's heart sank. She knew this was coming. "And Maya," she whispered. "What about her?" Damon didn't flinch. "Maya would be safe. I don't break promises I've made for a price. Your protection was only for your personal service. But your death would be inconvenient. It would prove the Velascos right, that you were important. It would also lead to more internal unrest." He stepped fully into the moonlight, his expression cold and calculating. "So, I'm going to do something I rarely do, Clara. I'm going to correct a mistake that was not entirely my own." Before Clara could ask what he meant, Damon's demeanor changed. His eyes narrowed, and he suddenly looked beyond her, toward the street below. He was listening, not just with his ears, but with every fiber of his being. Stay absolutely still, Damon murmured, his voice now a low, dangerous growl. And do not make a sound. Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. She followed his gaze. Far below, on the dimly lit street, a black van was slowly cruising past the building. It was unremarkable, but its movements were too slow, too deliberate. Velasco's, Damon breathed. They're still outside. And they found a way to disable the lower security cameras for a moment. They're making a move. They're coming for you, Clara. Clara's blood ran cold. She hadn't even heard a sound. How could he know? They're coming up the service elevator, by the looks of it, Damon said, his eyes still fixed on the street, but his attention was clearly on the unseen. They bought off a guard. Idiots. They didn't think I'd be watching. He turned to her, his movements fluid and quick. Listen very carefully. They think you are alone. They think they can grab you quietly and disappear. He grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly firm, not painful, but utterly commanding. You are going to act as bait. You are going to pretend to be asleep in your bed. Do you understand? Your door is not locked. Clara's mind reeled. Bait? But They will think they have you, Damon interrupted, cutting her off with a sharp glare. Now, go. Get into bed. Pull the covers up to your chin. Breathe slowly. Don't move until I tell you. Clara, terrified but completely reliant on him, obeyed without question. She scrambled back into her room, leaving the balcony door slightly ajar. She ripped off her clothes and plunged into the bed, pulling the silken sheets up to her chin, trying to mimic sleep. Her heart was thundering so loudly she was sure they could hear it through the walls. She squeezed her eyes shut, listening. She heard a faint, almost imperceptible click from her room door. It was being opened. Two shadows crept into her room. She could feel their presence, smell their cheap cologne and the sweat of their exertion. They were whispering in a language she didn't understand, but the tone was triumphant. Then, she felt a strong hand reach for her ankle. Just as the hand tightened, a sound cut through the air, a sudden, violent crack that wasn't a gunshot, but something just as deadly. It came from right beside her. One of the shadows gasped, a gurgling, choking sound, and then there was the unmistakable thud of a heavy body hitting the carpet. Clara's eyes flew open. Standing over her, a dark, terrifying silhouette, was Damon Thorne. He was no longer leaning on his balcony railing. He was in her room, a dark, silent force. And in his hand, held like a toy, was one of the Velasco men, his body limp, his neck twisted at an impossible angle. Damon had come through the balcony. He dropped the body, which landed with a sickening thump. He didn't even look at it. His eyes were fixed on the other Velasco man, who was frozen in horror, staring at his dead partner and the silent, lethal boss. You really thought, Damon said, his voice a low, cold whisper that was more menacing than any shout, that you could just walk into my home and take what's mine? The remaining Velasco man, thin and trembling, tried to pull out a knife. But Damon was too fast. He moved like a shadow, a blur of dark energy. A swift, brutal strike to the man's head, and he crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Clara watched, wide-eyed, her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't the bored, elegant man from the diner. This was the true Damon Thorne, a terrifying, efficient killer, a creature of the night who moved with absolute, silent precision. He looked down at the unconscious man, then at the dead one. He frowned, a look of mild annoyance on his face. Clumsy. They always are. He then looked at Clara, who was still frozen in her bed, staring at him. He was her guardian devil, appearing out of the darkness, lethal and cold, but saving her nonetheless. Get dressed, Damon commanded, his voice returning to its normal, calm tone as if he hadn't just ended a life in her bedroom. We're leaving. Leaving? Clara whispered, pulling the sheets tighter around her. Where are we going? Somewhere safer, Damon replied, walking over to the balcony door and closing it quietly. Somewhere no one will think to look for my distraction. You're too noisy here. He turned back to her. And Clara? From now on, you don't just observe. You learn to survive. And you learn that when I tell you to do something, I usually have a very good reason. Now hurry. My security will be here in a moment to clean up this mess. As he spoke, he retrieved a small, dark pistol from his tracksuit pocket and tucked it back away. He hadn't even needed it. His hands were his weapons. Clara scrambled out of bed, her mind reeling. She had just seen the true, terrifying nature of Damon Thorne. He was a ruthless killer, but he had just saved her life. He was her captor, but he was also her protector. The line between good and evil, helper and tormentor, had blurred into an unsettling, dangerous gray. She quickly pulled on the clothes she had worn earlier, her fingers fumbling with the buttons. She felt a profound sense of shock, but also a strange, desperate gratitude. The guardian devil had kept his promise to protect her, not out of kindness, but out of a need to control his own chaos. And she knew, with chilling certainty, that her life was now inextricably linked to his. The drive out of the city was silent and fast. Clara sat in the back of the car, next to Damon, her mind still replaying the brutal, silent efficiency of his movements in her bedroom. She kept her eyes fixed on the streetlights flashing past, avoiding looking at the man beside her. Damon looked completely calm, as if midnight assassinations were a minor inconvenience. He had changed back into a fresh dark suit and was examining something on a tablet. "You're quiet," Damon noted, not looking up. "You just killed a man in my room," Clara replied, her voice shaky but steady. "And knocked another one unconscious. I'm trying to process that." "He was a Velasco," Damon said dismissively. "He made a mistake and he paid for it. He broke Rule 0, never enter the boss's private residence without permission." "But I was the target," Clara protested. "They came because they thought I was your messenger." Damon finally looked at her, closing his tablet. "Their mistake, but your problem. However, I corrected the error. You are safe. That is what matters now. They know I was involved, which means they will be more cautious, but also angrier. This is why we are leaving the penthouse." They drove for nearly 2 hours, heading north, away from the dense city lights and into the quiet hills of upstate New York. The car eventually pulled up to a large, discreet property hidden behind tall, electric gates. It was a beautiful stone house, surrounded by woods, isolated and secure. "This is a safe house," Damon explained as the car paused for security checks. "No one outside the immediate circle knows it exists. You will stay here. You will continue to manage my documents and schedules remotely. The work remains the same, but the location is secure." Inside, the house was warm and richly furnished, less cold and sterile than the penthouse. A small, efficient staff met them, silent and deferential. Damon led her to a large, comfortable room on the ground floor. "You're tired. Sleep. We will talk business in the morning." But Clara couldn't sleep. The adrenaline was still pumping, and her mind was consumed not just by the fear of the Velascos, but by the overwhelming, immediate problems of her old life. She had to talk to Damon. The next morning, Clara found Damon in a study overlooking the woods, speaking on the phone in a low, intense voice. He finished his call and turned to her, looking expectant. "I need to go home," Clara announced without preamble. Damon raised an eyebrow, a clear sign of disbelief. "You just survived an attempted kidnapping by a rival family's thugs. You will not be leaving this secure location." "But I have to," Clara insisted, stepping closer. "Damon, I have real-life problems that haven't stopped just because I'm here. I have to see Maya, and I have to deal with the debt." "Maya is fine," Damon dismissed her. "Leon checked on her this morning. She's at the library, studying. I had an extra guard placed discreetly on her block. She is untouchable." "And the debt?" Clara pressed. She felt a familiar burn of shame rise in her chest, but she couldn't hide it anymore. "I've been working double shifts for weeks. My rent is due, but worse, I owe money to the loan shark in my neighborhood. Mr. Finch. I was supposed to make a payment yesterday, and I missed it because of your meeting." The name Mr. Finch meant nothing to Damon. "A local lender? Clara, you have thousands of dollars in cash, the money I gave you. Pay him." "It's not that simple." Clara burst out, the shame finally overwhelming her. "The interest on the loan is crushing. I took the loan out last year when Maya had an emergency dental procedure. I owe him far more than I can cover, even with the cash you gave me, because the interest is compounding daily." She looked away, fighting back tears of humiliation. "And Mr. Finch doesn't just ask for money. He owns my landlord. I'm afraid if I miss the payment, he'll raise the rent, or send one of his men to embarrass me in front of Maya. He's already done it once. He makes you feel so small, so exposed. Clara finally looked back at Damon, her eyes burning with despair and anger. That debt, that shame, is more dangerous to my safety than your rival families are. Because it's slow, and it crushes you quietly. I need to clear the slate. I need to buy out the loan completely. Damon listened silently, his expression unreadable. He wasn't bored, he was analyzing. He was looking at her pain as if it were data. Mr. Finch, Damon repeated, the name sounding foreign and insignificant on his tongue. A small-time predator. He walked over to a glass cabinet and poured himself a glass of sparkling water. Your original agreement with me was protection in exchange for service. You have already complicated my life. Now you want me to fund your personal life and clear your debt. I can work it off, Clara pleaded. I will work for you for years. Just make it go away. Make Mr. Finch and the shame disappear. Please. Damon took a slow sip of water. He walked back to his desk, placed the glass down, and stared at her. The silence stretched, heavy and tense. Finally, he spoke. I will do it. Clara gasped, relief washing over her. You will? Thank you, Damon. I promise, I'll work twice as hard. Quiet, Damon cut her off sharply. My generosity has a high price, Clara. I am not a charity. I am a machine. Everything must serve a purpose. He leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening into a terrifying mask of control. I will clear the entire debt. Every penny. I will buy out the loan and the building you live in. Mr. Finch will disappear from your life forever, and he will never humiliate you again. Your debt will be transferred to me. But, how much? Clara asked, hesitant. It doesn't matter, Damon said. The cash value is insignificant. The value is in your absolute, legal, and personal obligation to me. The shame you feel now will be replaced by a profound, lifelong obligation. I will hold all your debts, financial, personal, and professional. He stood up, walking around the desk to stand directly in front of her. I am making you an impossible offer, Clara. I will give you complete, absolute protection. Security for Maya, freedom from your debt, and a way to navigate this dangerous city. In return, I want your unquestioning loyalty. Damon looked at her, his eyes cold and unwavering. You will stop looking for ways to escape, stop plotting, and stop focusing on old problems. You will be mine. Your life is no longer about survival, it is about serving my interests completely. You will become an extension of my will. Do you accept this new agreement? Clara felt a sickening lurch in her stomach. He wasn't offering a job, he was offering a contract of ownership. The debt would be gone, but she would be entirely his, body and soul. It was trading one form of slavery for another, more luxurious, and far more dangerous one. But she thought of Daniel and the Northwood files. The debt was suffocating her, preventing her from hunting. This offer, this awful protection, would give her the absolute security and proximity she needed to complete her real mission. She would be safe inside the fortress, close to the center of power, where the truth about Daniel lay buried. She looked at the man who had just saved her life, the same man who terrified her, the same man who held the key to her entire future. She had no choice. I accept, Clara whispered, the words heavy and final. The debt is yours. I am yours. I will serve you, Damon. Unquestioningly. Damon smiled, a slight, victorious curl of his lip. Good. Now we can proceed. He walked back to his desk and picked up the phone. Leon, he said into the receiver. Initiate the Finch protocol. I want the entire portfolio, the loan, and the properties he controls. All of it. Make it quick, quiet, and complete. Mr. Finch is to be permanently removed from the city limits and informed that his debt is now owed to the Thorn Syndicate. He is not to speak Clara Jenkins' name again. He hung up the phone and looked at Clara. The shame is gone, Clara. The burden is mine. Now, let's talk about the Northwood files. That property is tied to a bigger acquisition I'm planning. I need your full, undivided attention on finding those missing documents. As Damon began to discuss the business of the syndicate, Clara listened, nodding and taking notes. On the outside, she was his obedient, highly focused assistant. On the inside, she was a secret agent, bound to the enemy, but now equipped with the ultimate protection and the perfect cover to find the truth about her missing brother. She had sold her freedom for a chance at justice, and the price felt crushing, but necessary. The safe house in the woods was quiet, but Damon didn't believe in long holidays. Just 2 days after he paid off her debt and killed a Velasco thug in her temporary bedroom, Clara was back in the city. But she wasn't going back to the cold penthouse where her attempted murder had just taken place. She was going somewhere far more intimidating, the Thorne family estate. This wasn't an apartment building or an office. It was a sprawling, classical stone mansion on the outskirts of the city, hidden behind high, ivy-covered walls. It was the historical heart of the syndicate, the real seat of power. If the penthouse was Damon's office, this was the entire Thorne kingdom. As the black sedan swept up the long, winding drive, Clara felt the familiar knot of fear tighten in her stomach. But this time, it was mixed with a new, steel-like resolve. She wasn't running anymore. She was Damon's. And now, she had a secret mission she needed to execute. Damon had been very clear. "You are no longer an experiment, Clara. You are my asset. Your presence at the estate is a statement. Everyone will look at you. Show no fear. You are here because I want you here." She was dressed for the part, a simple, impeccably tailored black dress that reached just below her knee, and sensible heels. Her hair was pulled back, emphasizing her strong, expressive eyes. She looked professional, composed, and absolutely out of place. The car stopped in front of the massive, oak-paneled front door, which was immediately opened by a stiff, silent butler who looked like he had been polishing silverware since the 1950s. Clara stepped out of the car. Damon, who had ridden up in a separate vehicle, met her at the entrance. He didn't touch her, but he gave her a sharp, assessing look that demanded perfection. "Show time," he murmured. They walked into a hall that was cavernous and silent. The floor was black and white checkered marble, polished to a mirror sheen. Grand staircases swept up to the second floor, and the walls were covered with huge, dark oil paintings of stern-faced Thorne ancestors. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, faint flowers, and unchallenged authority. The entire household staff seemed to materialize at once. Maids in stiff uniforms, younger assistants carrying notebooks, and burly security men, all moving silently, all freezing in place the moment Clara and Damon entered. The stairs. Every eye in the hall fixed on Clara. It wasn't the fleeting, judgmental stare she got in the diner. This was a deep, burning assessment. The staff stared with fear and confusion. They were the foot soldiers of the syndicate. They had heard the whispers about the waitress who slapped the boss, the Velasco confrontation, and the instant cleanup. They saw Damon, the untouchable heir, walking in with the same woman who had caused so much chaotic noise. They saw her as a dangerous wild card, someone who could destabilize the entire structure. They knew she was the woman Damon had chosen to break all the rules for. But the most dangerous looks came from the inner circle, who had gathered in the main lounge, a room as big as an airplane hangar, decorated with heavy velvet and gold trim. Julian, the advisor. Julian, the senior council member, was standing by a fireplace, nursing a drink. When he saw Clara, his face didn't move, but his eyes narrowed to thin, cold slits. His reaction was pure hate and contempt. Clara knew what he was thinking. This cheap distraction is still here. Julian represented the old guard, the belief that order, discretion, and tradition were the keys to power. Clara was the opposite, loud, public chaos. Her continued presence was a direct affront to Julian's control and judgment. He saw her as the ticking clock on Damon's eventual fall from grace. Clara could feel the silent vow in his gaze. "I will wait until the moment you become a true weakness, and then I will destroy you." Bianca, the fiancée. Bianca Rossi was seated on a sofa, looking perfect and regal. She didn't stand up. As Clara walked toward the lounge, Bianca's dark eyes locked onto her with terrifying intensity. Her expression was a mix of burning jealousy and loathing. Bianca didn't hide her rage. Her mouth was set in a thin, unforgiving line. For her, Clara wasn't just a political problem, she was a personal invasion. Damon had not only kept the slapper, but he had also brought her into the family's sacred home. It was a massive insult to Bianca's status as his bride-to-be. Clara remembered Bianca's quiet threat, "I will end you." That threat felt very real now, hanging in the opulent, dangerous air of the mansion. Damon, sensing the immediate, toxic atmosphere, paused just inside the lounge, keeping Clara slightly behind his shoulder. "Julian," Damon said, his voice calm and steady. "Bianca. I trust you are well. This is Clara. She will be managing all my personal documents and scheduling from the estate going forward." Julian nodded once, stiffly. "A highly unusual choice, Damon. Given her history." "My choices are my own, Julian," Damon replied smoothly, meeting the older man's gaze with unnerving confidence. "Clara is highly effective and completely loyal. Which is more than I can say for some of the guards the Velascos managed to buy." That last jab, a clear reference to the archive attack, was a sharp reminder to Julian and the council. "I control the security, and you are all vulnerable." Julian's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. Bianca rose from the couch. She glided toward Clara, stopping inches away. She wore a forced, chilling smile. "Welcome, Clara," Bianca said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "The estate is quite large. Don't worry, you'll learn the routines. Just try not to break anything. Some of our statues are priceless." "I'll be careful, Bianca," Clara replied, keeping her own voice level and respectful. She wasn't backing down, but she wasn't issuing a challenge either. She was simply stating her presence. Bianca's eyes flashed with fury that she quickly suppressed. She knew any confrontation now would only amuse Damon and raise Clara's profile. She turned and walked away, her silk dress rustling like dry leaves. Leon and Vaughn, the bodyguards. Clara spotted the two bodyguards standing near the archway, Leon, the professional driver and dark-skinned bodyguard, and Vaughn, the bearded, grumpy one. Leon looked at Clara with grudging respect. He had seen her quick thinking and the results of her presence, Damon's sudden involvement, the elimination of the Velasco thugs. Leon was a professional, and he respected efficacy. He saw her now as a necessary complication, a piece on the board. Vaughn, however, looked at her with pure disgust. He hated the disruption she represented, the way she had broken the hierarchy. He was an old-school syndicate man, and he hated that his boss was risking everything for a waitress with a temper. Damon turned to Clara. "Follow me. Your office and rooms are on the second floor, next to mine. You have a lot of work to catch up on, starting with the Northwood files." As they walked away, Damon leaned in, speaking just loud enough for her to hear. "See, Clara? You are a lightning rod. Everyone has an opinion about you. Use it. Let them underestimate you. Let them hate you." He paused as they ascended the grand staircase, stepping over a section of the marble where the thorn crest was embedded. "And remember this," Damon continued, his voice dropping slightly. "Your access is higher than anyone here, including Julian and Bianca. Use that access to find any detail you need for the Northwood documents, or anything else that looks like a potential threat. You have my full authority." Clara finally felt a sharp sense of purpose. This wasn't just survival, it was her chance. She was physically safe, financially secure, and had unlimited access to the syndicate's most secret records, the only place she might find a clue about Daniel. They reached a secluded hallway. Damon opened a solid, dark wood door. "This is your office." The room was smaller than the lounge but perfectly appointed, a desk, a huge monitor, and shelves filled with empty files waiting for organization. Crucially, there was a secure phone line and a safe for sensitive documents. "Your work begins here," Damon said. "The Northwood files are waiting for you in the safe. I want the cleanup plan by tomorrow. Focus, Clara." Damon left, and Clara was finally alone in the heart of the beast. She walked straight to the large safe tucked behind a bookcase. Damon had given her the code. Her fingers were still a little shaky as she entered the combination. The heavy door swung open, revealing stacks of files bound with brittle, yellowed ribbon. She pulled out the files labeled Northwood Property. The documents were thick and complex, full of old deeds and legal terms. But nestled inside one of the folders, she found something that wasn't a property deed. It was an old, faded employee badge from 10 years ago. The badge belonged to a cleaning lady who worked in the syndicate's downtown offices, near the Northwood lot. The badge was issued in the same year Daniel disappeared. Clara ran her thumb over the laminated photo of the woman on the ID. She wasn't an accountant or a lawyer, She was a low-level worker who would have been in the building late, seeing and hearing things. A cleaning lady losing vital documents, she remembered Marco saying. Clara felt a frantic surge of hope and fear. This was it. A tiny thread, 10 years old, leading from the missing property documents right into the heart of the crime. She wasn't looking for a document, she was looking for a name. She was looking for a person who knew what happened in that office right around the time Daniel vanished. She carefully put the badge away, hiding it deep in her new briefcase. She knew she couldn't ask Damon about an old employee. Not yet. She had to find out what happened to this woman first. Clara sat down at her desk, facing the enormous task ahead. She was trapped in the lion's den, surrounded by people who feared or hated her, with the fiercest lion of all, Damon Thorne, just down the hall. But she had the files, the access, and a secret that was more important than her life. The hunt for Daniel had just begun. Clara quickly fell into the demanding, strange rhythm of the Thorne estate. Her days were spent poring over old, dusty files in her small office, organizing Damon's complex, ruthless schedule, and always watching. She was the quiet shadow, listening to the muffled calls and observing the parade of dangerous, wealthy people who came to meet with Damon. The immediate priority was the Northwood cleanup plan, but Clara was always searching for that old, faded employee badge, the cleaning lady's ID. She knew the woman's name was Elena and that she had worked in the Thorne building 10 years ago. That name was the single key to Daniel's past, and she had to find out what happened to her without ever letting Damon know her true interest. The tension in the mansion was thick enough to cut with a knife, and most of it centered on Clara. Julian treated her like she was invisible, which was a subtle, constant threat. The rest of the staff moved around her with fearful caution, unsure if she was the boss's favorite or his next victim. The most dangerous person, however, remained Bianca Rossi. Bianca didn't shout or make threats in public anymore. She used subtle cruelty. She would leave passive-aggressive notes on Clara's desk about the temperature of the coffee, or she would make sure Clara was served last during staff meals, often deliberately giving her wrong information about Damon's schedule. But that wasn't enough to satisfy Bianca's burning jealousy. She needed a public demonstration of her superior rank. The trap was set during a large Sunday brunch hosted by Damon for several important syndicate associates, high-ranking men who needed to be reassured that the Thorne heir was still in control and not distracted by frivolous matters. The whole family, including Julian, was present. Clara was technically working, standing discreetly near the entrance of the sun-filled dining room, holding Damon's schedule. She was doing her best to fade into the background, focusing on the conversation and taking mental notes, trying to learn who was loyal and who was secretly aligned with Julian. Bianca looked spectacular, dressed in a sharp white suit, hosting the table with the smooth, practiced charm of a woman born to power. The opportunity arose when Damon stepped away from the table to take an urgent call in the hall, leaving Julian and Bianca in charge of the small group of associates. Bianca looked up and spotted Clara. A wicked, satisfied look crossed her face. "Clara," Bianca called out, her voice loud and carrying, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. Clara moved toward the table immediately. "Yes, Bianca." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Elena hadn't lost documents, she had tried to steal them. And her firing coincided exactly with the time Daniel disappeared. Clara felt a dizzying surge of certainty. Elena had found something in the old Northwood documents, something that led her to attempt a theft. And Daniel's kidnapping wasn't random, it was a devastating consequence of whatever Elena had found. She needed to find Elena, or what happened to her. She looked at the firing date, then scrolled through the records, finding a small, final payment slip. The address listed was old, but it was a starting point. Clara knew her time was limited. She had publicly survived Bianca's trap, and Damon had given her ultimate cover. Now she had to use that power, that political shield, to find the true story buried in the Northwood mess, the story of Daniel. This is a brilliant heightening of the internal and external threats, pushing Clara into a corner. She now faces political suspicion directly tied to her increasing access, further complicating her hidden mission. The tension inside the Thorne estate, already thick with jealousy, became instantly electric and dangerous. Just 2 days after Damon publicly defended Clara against Bianca's humiliation, a major problem arose, a leak. Critical information about the syndicate's planned acquisition of a key dockyard property, a major, multi-million-dollar deal, was leaked to the rival Salerno crime family. The Salernos immediately moved to sabotage the deal, costing Damon a fortune and, more importantly, a huge chunk of his rising reputation on the council. A leak of this magnitude was an immediate crisis. It meant someone inside the fortress was working against Damon. Suspicion immediately, violently, fell on Clara. She was the newest person in the estate. She had access to Damon's most sensitive documents, including the specific contract details that were leaked. She had no history with the syndicate, and she had an established, public history of disrespecting the heir. Julian Thorne, the old guard advisor, wasted no time. He was furious that Damon had humiliated him and Bianca at the brunch, and this leak was the perfect weapon to strike back. That very evening, Damon called an emergency meeting with Julian, Marco, and Bianca in the main office. Clara, as his assistant, was required to be present, taking notes and recording the meeting, her first time witnessing a true syndicate crisis. The air in the room was thick with barely contained rage. Julian stood opposite Damon's desk, his face red with anger, not even trying to hide his accusation. "It is obvious, Damon," Julian spat, pointing a sharp finger across the room, though his gaze was fixed on Clara. "This woman is the problem. She is an unknown entity, a public embarrassment, and now a proven security risk. She is the only new person who has seen the specific dockyard files." Damon remained calm behind his desk, leaning back, the picture of measured control. "Clara had those files for 1 hour, Julian. They were in a secure safe before and after. And she has nothing to gain from sabotaging a deal that pays her wages. She has everything to gain." Julian countered, his voice rising. "She has freedom. She is clearly working for the Salernos, or maybe even the Velascos, seeking revenge for her public humiliation. You saved her life, and she repays you with treason." Bianca, seated elegantly but rigidly beside Julian, chimed in, her voice smooth and venomous. "It is either treason, Damon, or it is gross incompetence on her part. Either way, she has compromised this family's operations. The syndicate cannot tolerate either. You must remove her. You must show strength." The pressure on Damon was immense. Julian was using the leak to challenge Damon's leadership and his choice to protect Clara. It was a power play, get rid of the waitress or lose the respect of the council. Clara kept her head down, writing notes, but her mind was racing. She knew she wasn't the mole. She had been completely focused on the Northwood files and finding Elena. But she also knew she looked guilty. She was the perfect scapegoat. "I am insulted by the assumption of my incompetence," Clara finally spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. She looked directly at Julian. "I organized those files immediately. I was never alone with them, save for the time I was in my locked office. If the leak came from the files I handled, then someone in this very room, someone who knew what I had, must have accessed them." The accusation hung heavy in the air. Julian stared at her, astonished by her audacity. "Are you accusing me, girl?" Julian demanded. "I am stating the security facts, sir," Clara replied, holding his furious gaze. "I am the new entry. But the files were secured in the vault before they came to me, and they returned to the vault immediately after. The lock code is known by 5 people in this house: Damon, Julian, Marco, Bianca, and the head of security. The leak could have come from anyone with historical access." Damon gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He hadn't expected her to throw the suspicion back so quickly. She had just bought herself time. "Clara has a point," Damon said, pushing back against the angry tide. "The leak is the problem, not the messenger. Julian, Marco, I want a full internal audit. I want to know where the security gap is. Until we have proof, Clara stays. Her security is my command, and that is final." He looked directly at Clara, a cold, silent warning in his eyes. "Don't disappoint me." The meeting ended with the tension unresolved. Julian and Bianca left, their hatred for Clara visibly intensified. She was now the confirmed object of their suspicion, and they would be watching her every move. Clara retreated to her office, locking the door. The immediate threat of the Velascos had been replaced by the slow, suffocating paranoia of being hunted by her own colleagues. She was surrounded by enemies. But the leak was also an opportunity. It proved that the system was vulnerable. She immediately pulled out the file on Elena. She had to act now, while everyone was distracted by the search for the mole. Clara used her secured internal computer to cross-reference Elena's old address with public records. She found that the apartment building was still standing, and Elena's name was gone, replaced by a new tenant. However, she found something else. Elena had a sister. A woman named Isabella who lived across the river in a quieter part of the city. Isabella's details were clean, no criminal record, no obvious connections to the syndicate, but the address matched the old family records. Clara knew the only way to find out what happened to Elena, and what Elena knew about the Northwood documents, was to talk to Isabella. But leaving the estate now, with suspicion so high, was a massive risk. She knew Julian and Bianca had eyes everywhere. She needed to get out quietly, secretly, without Damon knowing. That night, Clara waited until the entire estate was silent. Around 2 a.m., she moved with practiced stealth. She didn't use the main staircase. She used the small, rarely used servant stairwell near her office, which led down to the side entrance near the kitchens. She was dressed in dark clothes, carrying only a small, cheap duffel bag with a few items and the old employee badge tucked deep inside her bra for safety. She reached the back door. It was secured with a heavy deadbolt and an electronic lock panel. Clara hesitated. Damon's security was absolute. "Darling," Bianca said, using the term with cold sarcasm, "Julian was just mentioning how difficult it is to get good help these days. You know, reliable, honest staff who appreciate what they are given." She picked up a delicate porcelain teacup, which held a thin, decorative sliver of lemon. "This lemon," Bianca said, holding up the cup, her eyes locking on Clara. "It's far too thick. It ruins the aesthetics of the tea service. Truly appalling, isn't it?" She then smiled sweetly, but her eyes were cold. "Be a good girl, Clara. Take this back to the kitchen and have them slice a new one. Paper thin, the way they should be. And while you're there, make sure the rest of the tea service is perfect. You understand perfection, don't you?" It was a blatant, calculated humiliation. Clara wasn't the kitchen staff. Her job was to handle Damon's most secret documents and schedules. Sending her back to slice lemons in front of the syndicate leaders was a deliberate attempt to shame her, to put her back in her waitress place, and to show everyone that Bianca had the authority to order her around. A few of the old men at the table smiled thinly, appreciating the show of dominance. Julian looked satisfied. Clara felt the familiar sting of the injustice, the public shame. She gripped the leather briefcase containing Damon's schedule, reminding herself of Daniel and Maya. She had promised Damon she wouldn't challenge the household hierarchy, and she had to survive this. "Of course, Bianca," Clara said quietly, reaching out to take the teacup. "I'll ensure the kitchen staff corrects this immediately." She was about to turn away when a different voice cut through the air, sharp and dangerous. "Don't touch that, Clara." Damon was back. He had finished his call and was standing in the doorway, his eyes sweeping over the room. He must have caught the tail end of the exchange. His face was a mask of cold fury. Bianca's forced smile faltered. "Damon, darling, it's nothing. Just a small error with the citrus. I was simply reminding your assistant about the standards of service here." Damon didn't look at Bianca. His icy blue eyes were fixed directly on Julian, who was trying to look nonchalant. "My assistant," Damon said, his voice dropping low, demanding attention from every single person in the room, "is here to manage my life, Julian. Not to slice your tea garnish." He walked slowly toward the table, every step radiating menace. He stopped behind Bianca, his presence overshadowing her. "Clara Jenkins has access to every single account, contract, and schedule I possess," Damon stated, his voice ringing with authority. "She is the only person in this organization who knows the full scope of my movements, my investments, and my contingency plans. She is privy to more of the syndicate's sensitive information than every man at this table combined." He then looked at Bianca, his eyes utterly cold. "Clara is not kitchen staff. She is not a maid. She is not an errand runner. She is an extension of my command. To waste her time on lemons is not only childish, Bianca, it is grossly inefficient." He leaned down slightly, his voice a low, terrifying growl that only Bianca could hear. "Do not undermine my authority in front of my counsel again. It makes us both look weak." He straightened up and then did something Clara, and the entire room, found absolutely shocking. Damon reached out, took the teacup from Bianca's stunned hand, and handed it back to Clara. He then took Clara's hand, placing the teacup into her grasp. It was a clear, public gesture of connection and protection. "Clara," Damon said, his tone softening only for her. "I apologize for the distraction. You are dismissed from the brunch. Please return to your office and focus on the Northwood files. That is your priority." He was excusing her from the tension and, more importantly, publicly reaffirming that her most important duty was working on the historical files, the cover for her secret mission. Clara simply nodded, her cheeks burning, not with shame this time, but with the shock of being so fiercely defended. "Yes, Damon. I'll get right to it." She turned and left the room, clutching the teacup, the symbol of her humiliation, and the schedule book, the symbol of her power. The moment the door closed behind her, the entire atmosphere in the dining room erupted in hushed, tense conversation. Damon's defense was unexpected, and it created an immediate, deep rift. Julian, who had enjoyed Bianca's subtle attack, was furious. Damon had not only protected Clara, he had humiliated Julian and Bianca publicly by framing the humiliation as a threat to his own power. Bianca was left speechless and shaking, her carefully constructed facade shattered. Damon had shown the entire council that his engagement to her might be political, but his protection of Clara was personal, non-negotiable, and absolute. Clara returned to her office, locking the door behind her. She placed the teacup on her desk, staring at it for a long moment before she calmly carried it to the small kitchen in her office and washed it. She understood the political game now. Damon hadn't defended her out of kindness. He had defended his property. He had spent considerable resources, money, reputation, violence, to secure her. Bianca's attempt to undermine Clara was an attempt to undermine Damon's authority, and that was something he could never allow. But the protection, regardless of the motive, was real. It was a lifeline. It confirmed that as long as she was useful and loyal to him, he would not let anyone touch her. Clara sat at her desk, pulling out the Northwood files. She reached for the safe and retrieved the old employee badge of Elena. She had been looking for a way to research Elena without Damon knowing. But now, she realized, she didn't have to be quite so subtle. Her access was virtually unlimited, and Damon had just publicly stated that her work on the files was her highest priority. Clara took a deep breath. She reached for her computer and opened the confidential syndicate employee database, something Ms. Hayes had been very careful not to let her have full access to. Now, she had the confidence to demand it. She typed an internal message to Ms. Hayes, "Need full administrative access to historical personnel files for Northwood due diligence." Damon's direct order. Priority Alpha. In less than 5 minutes, Ms. Hayes, terrified of defying Damon's priority alpha and risking his wrath, sent Clara the password. Clara typed in Elena's name, the cleaning lady who worked at the office 10 years ago. The files loaded immediately. The details were sparse, but horrifying. Elena had been fired abruptly, not for incompetence, but for misconduct. The termination memo, dated 3 weeks after Daniel went missing, was signed by Julian Thorne, the very man who hated Clara now. Under misconduct, the memo simply read, "Attempted unauthorized extraction of classified material."